Tonight, when you drag yourself home from a corporate job that feels entirely pointless, or scroll through a social media feed filled with strangers you will never meet, you might ask yourself a strange question. Why is it that in one of the wealthiest, safest, and most comfortable eras in human history, so many of us still feel as if we are quietly coming apart? The answer was not discovered in a mouse colony, but it was disturbingly illustrated by one. In 1968, inside a federal research lab in Maryland, ethologist John Calhoun placed 4 pairs of mice into what became known as Universe 25, a protected enclosure with abundant food, water, nesting areas, and no predators. At first, the colony flourished. The population grew rapidly. Then it slowed, stalled, and finally collapsed. By the end, the mice were not starving. They were not being hunted. They had lost something harder to measure: the social patterns that made territory, mating, parenting, cooperation, and participation possible. Calhoun's experiment is often reduced to a simple warning about comfort, as if the lesson were that abundance makes living things weak. But the more unsettling lesson is subtler. Universe 25 suggests that abundance without meaningful social roles can become its own form of deprivation. As the population grew and stable social niches became harder to maintain, many mice no longer seemed to know where they belonged or what they were for. Some became aggressive. Some withdrew. Some stopped mating. Some mothers failed to care for their young. The colony did not collapse because food ran out. It collapsed because the social structure that gave individual lives shape had broken down. That old experiment on rodents has never mapped perfectly onto human society, and it would be careless to pretend that it does. Humans are not mice. Cities are not cages. Modern alienation cannot be explained by a single laboratory experiment. But Calhoun's work remains powerful as a metaphor because it points toward a question we are still struggling to answer. What happens when a society becomes materially efficient while stripping people of clear, consequential roles? One place where this erosion of clear social roles becomes especially visible is the modern workplace. Before the industrial age, many human roles were brutally difficult but painfully concrete. If you were a blacksmith, the village needed your tools. If you were a farmer, your family needed your grain. If you repaired a roof, taught a child, delivered a baby, or guarded a flock, the consequence of your work was visible. Your labor had a direct relationship to survival, community, and need. Today, many people work inside vast corporate systems where that relationship has become abstract, delayed, or invisible. The late anthropologist David Graeber famously called some of these roles bullshit jobs, positions that even the people performing them may privately suspect would make little difference if they disappeared. Many educated, well-paid professionals spend their days formatting documents that may never be read, attending meetings about other meetings, updating dashboards that exist mainly to justify more dashboards, and translating human effort into bureaucratic performance signals. On paper, many of these people are secure. They are employed, insured, connected, and productive. Yet psychologically, some of them feel strangely vacant. The problem is not that office work is physically hard in the old sense. It is that so much of it can feel detached from any visible consequence. When people cannot connect their labor to a real need, the mind does not necessarily relax into comfort. It may drift into numbness, resentment, or exhaustion. What we now label, sometimes too neatly, as burnout, disengagement, or quiet quitting may be partly a crisis of meaning. A feeling that one is still moving, still reporting, still performing, but no longer participating in anything that feels real. This decay does not stop when we log off from work. It also appears in the way we love, gather, and relate to one another. In Calhoun's colonies, the behavioral sink was not merely a matter of crowding. It was a collapse in the normal distribution of social behavior. The mice still occupied the same physical space, but their ability to interact in stable, generative ways deteriorated. Some compulsively gathered in certain areas, while other spaces remained underused. Some withdrew entirely. Some became incapable of ordinary mating or parenting behavior. Walk through any major city today, and the comparison is hard to ignore, even if it must be handled carefully. We live with unprecedented density and unprecedented connectivity, yet loneliness has become one of the defining emotional conditions of modern life. Millions of people crowd into the same urban centers, follow the same algorithmic trends, listen to the same podcasts, stand in the same lines, and swipe through the same faces, while still feeling almost impossible to truly reach. The modern version of isolation often does not look like neglect. It looks polished, it looks curated, it looks optimized. Calhoun described a group of mice later nicknamed the beautiful ones, animals that withdrew from social struggle and spent their time eating, sleeping, and grooming. They appeared healthy, but they had largely opted out of the reproductive and social life of the colony. Our human equivalent is not a generation of people who are simply vain or lazy. That would be too easy and too cruel a conclusion. For many people, withdrawal no longer looks like failure. It looks like polish, optimization, and control. We groom our online personas, curate frictionless feeds, and present ourselves as flawlessly intact from the outside, even as the desire to engage with a messy, demanding world quietly weakens. The deeper issue is that modern life has made withdrawal unusually attractive. Real intimacy is difficult. Dating requires risk. Friendship requires inconvenience. Family requires sacrifice. Community requires negotiation with people who may irritate, disappoint, or misunderstand you. Digital substitutes, by contrast, are clean, responsive, and controllable. Streaming platforms, curated feeds, parasocial relationships, and artificial intelligence companions can offer the feeling of connection without the dangers of being known. The result is not that technology has destroyed love. The result is more complicated. Technology has made it possible to avoid the friction through which love is usually built. When vulnerability becomes optional, many people choose the safer imitation. They are not irrational for doing so. They are adapting to a world that has made isolation convenient, aesthetic, and almost frictionless. Then there is the digital environment itself, the air through which modern consciousness now moves. Calhoun believed that if physical space became crowded, an intelligent species might survive by expanding into what he called conceptual space. Ideas, creativity, institutions, and new forms of meaningful participation. In theory, the internet should have been the greatest expansion of conceptual space in human history. It gave ordinary people access to knowledge, communities, tools, and creative possibilities that previous generations could barely imagine. But much of our digital world has evolved in the opposite direction. Instead of expanding our minds, it often narrows them into personalized loops. Smartphones function like automated feeders for attention, delivering a constant stream of novelty, outrage, validation, and distraction tailored precisely to our existing impulses. Algorithms learn what keeps us engaged, not necessarily what makes us wiser, stronger, or more capable of living with others. A mind conditioned by such an environment can become strangely fragile. If every feed is customized, every discomfort muted, and every moment of boredom instantly medicated, then ordinary life can begin to feel intolerably abrasive. A delayed reply feels like rejection. A minor disagreement can feel like a personal threat. A conflicting worldview feels like an existential threat. We begin to lose the coping mechanisms that are built only through contact with difficulty, patience, negotiation, frustration tolerance, and the ability to remain human in the presence of people who do not mirror us. This is where the lesson of Universe 25 becomes most unsettling. The danger is not comfort itself. Comfort can be humane. Safety can be good. Abundance can free human beings from needless suffering. The danger begins when comfort removes too much consequence, when safety eliminates too much responsibility, and when abundance is not matched by meaningful participation. A world with no hardship may sound like paradise, but a world with no role, no risk, no obligation, and no real need for you can become a very quiet kind of hell. Calhoun was not trying to write a prophecy of doom. He spent much of his career adjusting variables and building new environments, searching for ways to keep a crowded society from collapsing into dysfunction. His most important insight may not have been that mice fail under certain conditions, but that humans might not have to. Unlike mice, we can invent new roles. We can create institutions, rituals, responsibilities, art, communities, and forms of service that give life shape even when survival is no longer the daily problem. That is our escape route. Not a rejection of comfort, but a refusal to let comfort become passivity. Not a retreat from technology, but a decision to use it as a tool for creation rather than sedation. Not a romantic return to suffering, but a recognition that human beings need more than pleasure, safety, and convenience. We need to be needed. We need difficult attachments. We need responsibilities that cannot be automated, optimized, or outsourced. Every time you step away from the automated feed, Every time you choose a difficult real-world responsibility over a convenient digital substitute, every time you build something that requires patience instead of merely consuming something designed to hold your attention, you are doing what the mice could not do. You are inventing a new reason to participate. Universe 25 did not prove that comfort destroys society. It suggested something more haunting. When abundance is separated from meaning, life can decay even inside paradise. The cage may be comfortable, and the food may be free, but for human beings, survival has never been enough. We do not only need to live, we need a reason to enter the world.